I've got a story from my college days back when I was delivering pizzas. I used to deliver pizzas to this hotel pretty frequently. There was a cute girl at the front desk who always gave me a warm smile, and sometimes I'd sneak her a slice. One day, she asked if I wanted to grab a drink after work. I thought, why not? She seemed nice enough. That first date turned into a 2-hour venting session about her ex. She nursed a single drink the whole time, explaining she never had more than one when out, given her petite frame. I tried to steer the conversation elsewhere, but she was laser-focused on her past relationship. The bartender and I shared a relieved glance and a Jaeger bomb when she finally left. A week later, I'm back at the hotel, and she's bummed I hadn't asked her out again. I chalked up our odd first outing to her having a bad day and agreed to another drink. Except this time, she stood me up. She texted an apology the next day, something about needing to drink a whole bottle of Jack with a friend going through a breakup. Her behavior was becoming erratic, and I decided to distance myself. But that's when things got creepy. Every time I delivered to the hotel, she'd be there questioning why we hadn't hung out. I started making excuses, even claiming I was sober to avoid going for drinks. She began texting me late at night with cryptic messages like, "You should really reconsider that thing," or commenting about other staff like, "I think the server Molly isn't very cute." Her texts were bizarre, the kind that makes you question someone's stability. Delivering pizzas to that hotel became an unnerving experience. Whenever I was there, her gaze would follow me relentlessly. If she was talking to a guest, she'd stop mid-conversation just to stare. It was beyond uncomfortable. It was downright unnerving. We drivers used to vie for deliveries to that hotel because they were easy runs, but soon I found myself avoiding them, giving them up to anyone who'd take them. The thought of encountering her and her intense, unblinking stares was too much. A couple of weeks after I started avoiding her, something happened that made me seriously consider changing my job. I was finishing up a late-night delivery at the hotel when I noticed a piece of paper tucked under the windshield wiper of my car. It was a hand-drawn picture, quite detailed, of two figures sitting at a bar, unmistakably her and me. What made it disturbing was the way she had drawn herself leaning in close to my sketched figure, with an exaggerated smile on her face and hearts floating around her head. My figure, on the other hand, looked uncomfortable, almost trapped. It was both bizarre and unsettling, a clear indication of her fixation. But that wasn't all. Accompanying the drawing was a note. In a mix of cursive and print, it read, "I thought about what you said about being sober. We don't need drinks to have fun. I have lots of ideas. Wait and see." After that, her behavior escalated. She started leaving similar notes, sometimes with drawings, on my car whenever I delivered to the hotel. Each note was more intense than the last, filled with suggestions of things we could do together and references to inside jokes we never had. It was as if she was crafting a fictional relationship in her mind. Her stares became more intense, too. It reached a point where she'd find excuses to come out from behind the desk whenever I was there trying to strike up a conversation or offering me snacks and drinks, which I politely declined. I talked to my manager about it, and while he was sympathetic, he couldn't do much since the hotel was one of our biggest customers. It all culminated one evening when I arrived at the hotel and found her waiting outside, dressed up as if for a date. She approached me with a wide smile, saying she had taken the night off so we could spend time together. I had to firmly tell her I wasn't interested, and that her behavior was making me uncomfortable. She seemed shocked, as if she genuinely believed there was something between us. After that confrontation, I stopped delivering to that hotel altogether, passing those orders to my colleagues. Thankfully, I never heard from her again, but the memory of those few weeks still gives me the creeps. Her inability to recognize boundaries and her delusional view of our interactions were a stark reminder of how easily someone can misconstrue friendliness for something more, and how quickly things can turn creepy. This story is from 17 years ago, and it still haunts me. I was 18 at the time, working at a big home loan company during the real estate boom of the early 2000s. It's a story about a date that opened my eyes to the darker side of human nature. I worked with this guy 4 years my senior. We interacted enough at work for me to feel comfortable around him. One evening, after working overtime, he asked me out for dinner. I was both hungry and flattered, so I agreed. Instead of heading to a restaurant, he said he wanted me to meet his mom and drove us to his house, located on a farm about 45 minutes away. Remember, this is the Los Angeles area. Farms are a rarity. When we arrived, he led me into the house to meet his mother. His mom was in the kitchen, barely acknowledging us as we walked in. Her disinterest was palpable. She didn't ask who I was or why I was there. It was as if my presence was completely inconsequential. There was an uncomfortable silence as she continued with her work, not even making eye contact. His introduction felt more like a formality than a genuine desire for us to meet. As we left the house to tour the farm, he seemed eager to show me around, but there was a darkness to his enthusiasm. The tour started ordinarily enough, with him pointing out where they kept the pigs and horses. But as the night sky stretched over us, his demeanor changed. It was when I made a casual comment about how great it must have been to grow up in such a place that he opened up about his disturbing past. He confessed that as a teenager he had severe anger issues, which he took out on the animals on the farm. It started with trapping small rodents like rats and mice. He didn't just kill them, he would trap them, and then with a disturbing calmness, he described how he would stab the trapped animals with his pocket knife, ensuring they couldn't escape. The way he pointed to his knife at that moment sent a chill down my spine. His actions escalated over time. He recounted how one day, in a fit of rage, he killed the neighbor's cat, but the most horrifying confession was about one of his own pigs. In a moment of uncontrollable anger, he killed it, leaving the carcass for his mom to find. He described this incident as a turning point when he realized his actions were spiraling out of control. As he told me these things, his tone was eerily matter-of-fact, as if he was recounting a mundane series of events rather than a series of violent acts. His lack of emotion or regret was the most disturbing part. It was then that I realized the gravity of the situation I was in. I was alone, far from home, with someone who had a history of unprovoked violence. The urgency to leave grew within me, but I masked my fear, feigning calmness. I convinced him to take me back under the guise of being hungry and worried about my car. The relief I felt as we drove back to the city was overwhelming, but it was overshadowed by the fear of what could have happened. He drove us back and we had dinner at a burger place near work. After dinner, he drove me to my car in the now empty office parking lot. I quickly thanked him and got out, rushing into my car before he could even step out to say goodbye. After that night, I did everything I could to avoid him at work, trying not to be rude but also not wanting to be alone with him again. Fortunately, he got promoted to a different department in another building a couple of weeks later. Looking back, I realized how close I was to a potentially dangerous situation. His behavior, that isolated farm, his chilling confessions, they all paint a picture of someone deeply troubled. It was a wake-up call about trusting my instincts and being more cautious about who I spend time with. I've got a story from my college days that still makes me shudder when I think about it. It's about one of my first ever dates, and how it spiraled into a series of increasingly uncomfortable and downright creepy encounters. Back in college, there was this guy I knew through mutual friends. We weren't close, but we'd seen each other around campus and at student events. One night, we ended up at the same student night event and hit it off. We shared a few laughs, danced a bit, and even shared a kiss. It was exciting, the kind of college fling you read about in novels. He invited me to his place later that week, which he shared with other students in the heart of town. I was expecting a date, maybe going out for drinks, but when I got there, his room was full of friends. A little odd for a date, but I thought maybe we'd head out alone soon. But that didn't happen. He practically ignored me the whole time. When one of his friends pointed out that I was there, he just gave a nonchalant, "Oh, hi," and went back to his conversation. I felt like a ghost, awkwardly trying to fit in with people I barely knew. The group decided to head to another house to watch a movie. I tagged along, still holding on to some hope that the night would turn into the date I had imagined. It didn't. He continued to ignore me, chatting and laughing with everyone else as if I wasn't there. After the movie, I waited, thinking maybe he'd walk me to the bus stop. But no, he didn't even acknowledge me when I said goodbye. I walked alone through the town at night, feeling embarrassed and puzzled by his behavior. I saw him around campus after that night, but he was always distant. It was clear he wasn't interested, and I moved on, chalking it up to a bad date experience. But the story doesn't end there. A couple of years later, I ran into him at a club. He approached me with this over-the-top apology for how he had treated me, trying to hug me and insisting on buying me a drink. I politely refused, but he wouldn't let up. He followed me around the club, standing at the edge of the dance floor, watching me with this intense, almost obsessive gaze. It was beyond creepy. His eyes were locked on me, his hands cupping his face as if he was in awe. He had this little smile, like he was seeing something miraculous. My friends noticed and were equally disturbed. They kept asking, "Who is that guy? Why is he acting like that?" I tried to ignore him, but his presence was unnerving. He didn't dance, didn't interact with anyone else, just stood there watching me. It felt like he wasn't seeing me as a person, but as some object of his weird fixation. The night ended with me feeling more than a little freaked out. I avoided him after that, and thankfully, he didn't approach me again. But that image of him standing there staring, stayed with me. Looking back, I realize how naive I was, how I ignored the red flags because I was excited about a potential romance. His behavior, from ignoring me on what I thought was a date to obsessively watching me years later, was unsettling. It was a lesson in trusting my instincts and recognizing when attention isn't flattering but frightening. In the world of online dating, you never really know what you're going to get. That's a lesson I learned the hard way on what I thought would be a quaint walk and talk date in my favorite park. I had met this guy online, and we seemed to click through chats, optimistic and open to the possibility of at least making a new friend. I found myself looking forward to meeting him. The park was a place of serenity for me, a backdrop perfect for getting to know someone. Little did I know, this walk would take a turn into the bizarre, challenging my expectations of what interesting really meant. As I approached our designated meeting spot, I spotted him easily, standing out with an air of unease. He was taller than I expected, with a nervous smile that flickered as I walked up. "Hi, are you Jake?" I asked, extending a hand. He nodded, his handshake surprisingly firm, and we set off along the winding park paths. The early conversation was simple, pleasantries exchanged with a hint of awkwardness typical of first meetings. But as we delved deeper into the walk, Jake's demeanor began to shift. He talked animatedly about unusual topics, from astrology to mysticism, each sentence more eccentric than the last. At first, I found his quirkiness charming in a peculiar way, but it wasn't long before his claims of psychic abilities and wizardry started. It was bizarre, to say the least, and a growing sense of discomfort began to replace my initial amusement. As we meandered through the lush greenery of the park, the conversation took an even stranger turn. Jake began to weave tales of his alleged psychic powers and experiences with the supernatural. He claimed he could read minds and influence events with just a thought. I tried to laugh it off, thinking he was just playing a character for fun, but he persisted. His eyes had an intense gleam as he spoke of his mystical insights and encounters with otherworldly entities. I attempted to redirect the conversation to more mundane topics like movies or music, but Jake seemed disinterested, almost impatient to return to his fantastical stories. The charm of the park's natural beauty was fading, overshadowed by the surreal nature of our dialogue. With each step, my initial intrigue was being replaced by a growing unease, and I found myself glancing at the path ahead, wondering how soon we could politely part ways. As our walk came to an awkward close, Jake suddenly dropped a bombshell. He casually mentioned that he hadn't driven to the park and asked if I could give him a ride to the bus station. I was taken aback, not just by the request, but by the assumption that I'd oblige. A part of me wanted to refuse, to end this bizarre date right there, but another part, driven by a mix of sympathy and social obligation, reluctantly agreed. As we walked to my car, I couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility, despite the day's oddities, to ensure he got to his destination safely. During the brief car ride to the bus station, Jake's erratic behavior escalated. He fidgeted constantly, filling the car with frantic talk of mystical abilities. Abruptly, he announced an urgent need for a restroom. Before I could react, the situation took a humiliating turn. Jake had an accident, wetting his pants in the passenger seat. The car was instantly engulfed in an uncomfortable silence and the pungent odor of urine. He muttered a feeble apology, his face flushed with embarrassment. As we arrived at the bus station, the bizarre encounter reached its peak, leaving me in a state of shock and disbelief over the surreal events. Reflecting on that insane day, I realized how unprepared I was for the unpredictability of human behavior. Jake's transformation from an intriguing online persona to an erratic stranger in person was jarring. His bizarre claims of psychic powers, followed by the embarrassing incident in my car, painted a picture of someone deeply troubled. The experience taught me a valuable lesson in setting boundaries and trusting my instincts. It also highlighted the stark difference between online interactions and real-life encounters. In hindsight, I wish I had recognized the red flags earlier and trusted my discomfort.